Yeah, good morning, Noah. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Could you briefly introduce yourself and a little bit about your work?
Sure. Well, I'm Noah Falstein. I've been a game developer since 1980, so I got started in the dark ages when we were actually still working on just zeros. We hadn't discovered ones yet, so things were really difficult. My career has been primarily in the games side of things, although I've branched out quite a bit. And it's split into a few sections. The first 16, 17 years or so, I was working for companies like Lucasfilm Games that then became LucasArts Entertainment when I was there, and the 3DO company that was the first CD-ROM based game console just came out a year before the first PlayStation, and PlayStation kind of ate its lunch. And Dreamworks Interactive and a few other companies along the way. And then I had another big chunk of time where I ran my freelance business, The Inspiracy, and worked as a freelance game designer and producer primarily. And gradually over time with that, as I got into the 2000s, started to do more work in areas called serious games. And I hate the term gamification personally, but that's what it's often become. Then 4 years ago, I became Google's chief game designer. Had a really interesting opportunity there, and spent 4 years at Google working on a number of different things. Their augmented reality project Tango, their VR system Cardboard, and then Daydream, and worked in both a game development group and their developer relations group there. But I got a little restless because Google is an amazing company, but they don't really do very much in terms of products and getting stuff out on the market that people use. They certainly are very big on tools and their flagship things like Gmail. But in terms of the kinds of games and experimental things that I love to do, there really wasn't much opportunity. So I left there just this last April and have been concentrating on the area that I think is emerging very quickly and very exciting, which is games for health and neurogaming, and basically the confluence of neuroscience and games, because I think that both games help neuroscience in a lot of ways and vice versa, and it's just starting to really take off in a lot of new directions at this point.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. That's quite an amazing career. It feels like you're bringing the whole history of like the internet and everything going with you to the conference. So I was going to ask you, yeah. So what is exciting you most at the moment? And I hear about the neurogaming. So maybe you can, even within that, what's the thing that's really exciting you about it? What's getting you up in the morning?
Sure. Well, I mean, it is a little overwhelming. I mean, one of the things that's great about this whole interactive industry is that it's so multifaceted and constantly changing. Specifically on the neurogaming side, even that has a lot of different aspects. But I think the part that I'm most excited about right now is that games are not only something that can, sort of probe into neuroscience or essentially make some of the tests and things that neuroscientists use more palatable and engaging so that people are willing to spend more time on them. But we're starting to see really interesting indications that games can actually work pretty much on the same level as medicine and have a really direct effect on people in a very positive way. A couple of examples, there's been a lot of work already using game systems and VR to treat phobias and post-traumatic stress disorder, and that it turns out that VR in particular is really good at creating a world that tricks your brain into thinking you're actually there, and both in terms of desensitizing yourself to fears, whether it's fear of flying or fear of heights or fear of spiders, or getting over a trauma, as a lot of soldiers have gone through, for example. It's really good at tricking your brain into thinking you're there and allowing the therapist essentially then to kind of introduce the items that triggered the problems in the first place and gradually get somebody over those. So that's one thing that's been around for 15 years or so. But what is really new and exciting these days is that looks like more pure games are going to be able to treat things like attention deficit disorder, help people on the autism spectrum, either in terms of recognizing facial expressions or having social interactions. Even dealing with things like pain and pain remediation and stroke recovery and depression, and a lot of different areas that are overlapping now. And sometimes that's actually a game. People play the game and find that they're getting better. Sometimes it's using game technology, like with the phobias. It's not so much that you play a game, but that a game that was made to simulate fighting in Afghanistan or Iraq, it turns out to be perfect at treating post-traumatic stress disorder for people who've come back from doing that in real life.
Wow, again, so much to unpack, because what I get from that is, often, it's a non-threatening way of dealing with these things. Before we've kind of labelled it and given a tablet, a medicine, and it's kind of like, deal with it, but it's kind of masking it, whereas it sounds like, and again, being a coach, what I'm really excited about, behavioural change is just about being aware of it, and then it's just about practicing. And so what I'm hearing from you is that actually we can bring the internal out here and actually work with it, and that will train our brain in the real world.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, on the coaching side, one of the things that's interesting is that lots of times people may know that something is good for them, but still find it really difficult to create the kinds of habits that you need to, change your life. And, when people look at video games, in fact, it's one of the interesting things that brought this about is that, parents would say something like, my kid has attention deficit disorder and can't spend 5 minutes in a class concentrating on his schoolwork, but he'll spend, 3 hours on a game and never, emerge from it all. And people came to realize that with what we've learned to do with games, we've figured out how to tap into some really fundamental interests and basically get inside people's head and get them completely involved and immersed. And with the new VR and AR technologies, we've just been able to expand that even more so and tap into emotions that were hitherto very difficult to reach. And as a consequence, there's lots of different directions to go, but specifically in terms of things like treatment, that means that we are learning how to use something that was seen as just entertainment and diversion in a really, positive, focused way to actually change people's behavior, to change actually their brains. We use fMRI and EEG, and we're able to see that when you play one of these games, you can get better at, for example, multitasking or voluntarily expanding the areas of your brain that deal with location and moving around in the world. A lot of things where we're actually now able to image those things and show that the games not only have effects, but they can have lasting effects that go on for many months after you've played.
And talking to a couple of the keynotes as well who work with AI and gaming and algorithms and stuff, the word that kept on coming up was like, we need to move to this place or have this perspective of union. It's a union, it's an integration, that before it was like this separation you had. Gaming and it was very separate, or AI is very separate to humans, but actually it's bringing it together. And actually, how do you work with them in tandem? How do they support each other? How do we use it for raising our consciousness, or to take us to the next level, or however you want to frame it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think bringing different disciplines together is one of the most exciting things for me. I love working with people from other areas. I went into my consulting business largely because I enjoy variety, and it gave me a chance to work with scientists and educators and therapists and all sorts of different people. And if you're very narrowly focused, if you only want to do one thing and just want to be great at that, that's fine, but it cuts you out from a lot of opportunities of finding ways. It's a overused term, but synergy is a real thing. And if you can get people from several different disciplines who find a way to cooperate and merge all those talents and essentially harness all the power. The things you touched on. AI obviously is, or machine learning, I guess, is the term for AI that's actually working. That's been incredibly adaptable as well, and is applied. Certainly has been applied to games since the very beginning, but is starting to be much more effective in all these other areas. And the health area and the research areas are just burgeoning because of that.
Yeah, and it's exactly here where my hope is, for the future, because, with Einstein's quote that we can't save the problems in the same kind of consciousness in which they were created. And that's what I'm hearing, is that we really are in an exciting place where we are getting into not only exponential technology, but exponential leadership, exponential growth in all these different things. And there lays the solutions. We just aren't quite there yet. It's going to happen, though.
Yeah, I mean, Google was a real exciting experience for me because the company is just full of really smart, motivated people who are looking into all these different areas. And, the frustration there was just that there was never enough time to do all the different projects that came up, and so many different ways that people from these different disciplines are finding really fruitful collaboration. And I haven't even delved into things like eye tracking or surface electromyography, which is an interesting new thing of being able to pick up people's electrical signals in their bodies just from a patch or a bracelet on the surface of your skin. It's really turning into a science fictional world in a lot of ways, and things are moving very quickly, and certainly the high tech area.
Yeah, and so without spoiling, your talk, because I know you're going to do it, but it feels like you have this vantage point. It sounds like you are able to look over the horizon, and you're able to see what is going to be happening in just a few years' time. So could you just paint us a teaser of a picture of how the world is going to look in 5 years' time?
Well, I'm always, I've grown up on science fiction. In fact, I think, at least 3/4 of the game designers I know all kind of had the same books and movies in our background. And one of the things that I've learned is the danger of making predictions. So I don't want to predict the whole future for you, but there are certainly several pieces that I think are absolutely going to happen. I'll just start with the entertainment side. I am very excited about the blending of the virtual and the real worlds, and I think we're within just a few years of being able to have a virtual world that we see and interact with at all times around us. Basically, if you imagine having imaginary companions, but you can actually see them through your headset, and you can share them with other people. And those could also be guides and teachers. They can essentially, allow us as creators of virtual experiences to bring that into people's everyday world, so that it's not just sitting in front of a computer screen, but much like assistants like Google Assistant and Siri have kind of become companions and around all the time. I think we're going to start having those come from just an audio voice coming out of your phone into your whole world. We're certainly seeing that start to happen, and I think that we're going to be seeing more with VR movies. There's a lot of skepticism about that because VR has had some hiccups along the way, and 3D movies, ever since the 1950s, people have been promising that'll be a big thing, and it has had multiple waves and never really caught on very thoroughly. But I find that virtual reality really gives you an emotional connection, particularly an empathic connection, that I think is stronger than anything we've ever been able to do before. And I'm really excited what that means for not only creating, sort of a passive movie experience in VR, but an interactive one where you choose either through actually selecting things or even through your gaze itself of what it is that you're looking at to experience different parts of a story. Maybe not change the path of a story, but give you different emphasis, different pieces of it as you go. So that's on the entertainment side. I think that's going to be amazing. On this medical side and health-related side. A lot of really mind-blowing things on that level of being able to use games to treat illnesses. Certainly, a lot of neurological illnesses also enhance us in various ways. That there have been also some false steps and missteps along the brain training side of trying to get people smarter, increasing their executive function, their working memory, those sorts of things. And I don't think those were mistakes so much as just early steps along a path. But I do believe that we're going to be able to, get up in the morning, play a game that we're looking forward to, and have that game basically, be the equivalent of a morning cup of coffee, and possibly also be scanning us for any early signs of degenerative diseases or depression, and maybe even treating those things, all in one. So a lot of really exciting things there, and that may team up with the people doing the Human Genome Project, in that it may not be one size fits all, but your genotype is read into your programs, and they're aware that you work better with a certain type of learning or a certain type of input, and it focuses that way, and may be aware, for example, that you have a family history of Alzheimer's, and is doing an extra scan on that to make sure that you're doing fine. So I think those are just a handful of the ways that we're going to see this mix of games and technology and neuroscience and biology all coming together.
Well, and what I love about it, what I got from is there's a certainty in how you're speaking, because often I hear about it and you're like, yeah, is it really going to happen? Is it something that's there? But because you've been in it and you're really in the core of it, I can just feel from you, yeah, this is going to happen. Like, this is, it's there, it's happening right now.
Well, I think William Gibson has a quote that says, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And that's actually what conferences, like this are so good for, because I'm not speculating on things that might happen in many cases. I'm talking about things I've already seen in very small ways in very early stages, and having now lived through so many cases of early technologies that then became huge. Remembering seeing the very first time I had a demo of Jaron Lanier had something called the Data Glove, and he's the guy who coined the term virtual reality. But he wasn't even sure what he had at the beginning. He was interested in a programming language he was using, but everyone he demoed to was interested in this idea of being able to kind of reach into the screen and manipulate things. And from that, I've learned to extrapolate from these early interesting glimmers. And the fact is, in a lot of cases, it's just a matter of taking this tiny spark and letting it catch on and spread throughout the world.
And this is what I'm so excited now for your talk, to really hear and see and feel, because it feels like you've been following this path for 30 years or 40 years, and like it's not like it's just kind of there. It's like you've watched this glimmer grow and grow and grow and grow, and now it's just manifesting itself. That this isn't just an overnight thing. This is something that has been, getting momentum for a very long time.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the advantages of having seen a lot of this stuff happen, is that you really gain an appreciation for the flow of how new technologies are introduced and when they're actually going to be successful or not. The latter may be sometimes a little difficult to predict, but you can certainly see those overall trends in a long-term flow that way.
And before we finish up, because I'm just very curious, because I was, what I've read a little bit about, with Mark Zuckerberg's doing his VR with Puerto Rico, and that's taken, a lot of people are unhappy with that. And so the question is, there's also this thing of how do we use this, like the ethical perspective. And so what are you seeing that is kind of wrapping all of this to feel as if, there is a kind of there is something that's ethically holding this, because otherwise it feels that we're a bit screwed.
No, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the dangers. And, I know that often the public perception is that the creators of these technologies are just creating cool technologies without any thought to their consequences. And I certainly can say that everybody I know who's working on these sorts of projects is acutely aware that we need to be careful about them. But the flip side of that is that if they're going to be beneficial, if they're going to help us, we also need to be bold in moving forward and figuring out how those can work. I mean, just taking games. Early in my career, there was a lot of pushback of people who thought that games were a total waste of time and they're hurting their children's minds and everything. And it's really one of the things that helped lead me into this whole neurogaming side is that it's very gratifying to be able to show scientifically verified ways that the very same games, the very same techniques that we developed for entertainment are absolutely essential in helping to treat and improve a lot of these qualities. And in the meantime, a lot of the predictions people had about how violent games are the source of violence, and there's all these concerns about that. As games have become more and more popular, overall trends in violence have decreased. And I'm not saying that games are responsible for that, but I think it's very dangerous to assume that there are correlations. When I was a kid, I was being warned that comic books would rot my mind, and maybe that was true to some extent. But now, they're basically the core of most of Hollywood's income these days, and a lot of things that seem like they might be dangerous or at least questionable at first. As you get to understand them and learn about them, you can actually utilize them in really positive ways. So it's much like the old adage of fire being, a good servant and a bad master. The real trick is in learning how to use these things in positive ways.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying there, and it's about expanding the timeline in which you see things, because if you just focus it right at the start when it's causing the disruption, of course, people are going to use it in a negative way, or negative things are going to come up, or the same stories, as you say, that have been used for every technology will come out, but we've got to be able to hold that and actually expand to actually look at what is it that we're actually trying to do here on a evolutionary kind of perspective.
Absolutely.
So we're coming to the very end of our time. So if you could, because I'm just trying to get sound bites, the challenge is, could you give us, like, in 2 or 3 sentences, what is the message that you're coming with to Øredev?
Well, let's see. I think one of the most exciting things is that games that had hitherto been used primarily for entertainment, of course, are now starting to be used really effectively, not just to help people, but actually to treat illnesses and improve their lives in really substantial ways. I'm also really excited about the potential for virtual and augmented reality and mixed reality, or whatever else we might call it, to affect our lives in all sorts of really interesting ways in terms of entertainment, education, and just kind of making things more fun and more enjoyable and more useful all around. It's an extremely multifaceted technology, and I just can't wait to see what we do with it.
Thank you so much. I really can't wait for your talk in Malmö. So thanks for this time, and we'll see you. It's in like 2-3 weeks' time.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.